Okay, Shalini, just start off by just describing yourself to us. Who are you and what are you up to?
My name is Shalini Kantayya. I am a filmmaker, Brooklyn-based filmmaker, eco-activist, and science fiction fanatic.
And you've made this movie, Catching the Sun, which I enjoyed very much. But tell us, what is the purpose of your film?
The film is really about hope, and it follows the hope and heartbreak of unemployed Americans who are trying to get jobs in the solar industry. And it sort of explores, I think, the hidden story behind solar energy, that it's not just about solving climate change, but it could also be a way of sort of bringing economic opportunity to the working class and to the middle class. And so the story follows, a whole range of sort of unexpected characters, from a unemployed American worker to a Green Tea Party activist to a Chinese solar entrepreneur, and they're all sort of racing forward towards a clean energy future. And so the film is really about who will sort of win this battle for power in the 21st century.
Well, let me try to answer my own question in a way that I think might actually be a better answer than what you gave me. I think what your film is doing, or is trying to do, is to reframe the solar energy debate in economic terms, in terms of job opportunities and in terms of investment opportunities, because those arguments are far more attractive to conservatives who traditionally have been most resistant to the idea of solar power. What do you think of that particular interpretation of your movie?
That's actually accurate. Absolutely. I think that we've been talking about clean energy as something, there's this sort of general misunderstanding that solar energy is something that isn't quite financially, we're not ready for it yet. And I think in the film, and in the making of this film, what I really discovered is that the solutions to climate change and economic inequality are actually the same. And what's good for the polar bears is actually really good for the middle class too. I think that this is a story that's really about innovation and technology in the 21st century, and that we see that fossil fuel has sort of concentrated wealth and power in the hands of a few, and it also is inefficient, and it's frankly last century's technology. And we have now sources of creating power that are more efficient, more cost effective, and less polluting, and so solar makes a lot of sense.
Now, was there a point of realization for you as a filmmaker that the traditional feel-good, tree-hugging, latte-sipping, hipster lefty sentiments that are usually associated with, green energy and so on, don't work anymore as an argument?
My work as a filmmaker never really starts with politics. It usually starts with finding a compelling character and telling a story. And for me, when I first visited Richmond, California, which is this old refinery town, and like many cities in America, is a post-industrial city. Many of our manufacturing industries have left and gone abroad, gone to Asia and other countries, and so left a lot of people without sort of economic opportunity. And so when I visited the Solar Richmond program and saw sort of unemployed workers trying to retool for jobs in the solar industry, I thought, here's $1 trillion idea. You can connect people who most need work with the work that most needs to be done. And so, sort of in the making of this film, what moved me was not so much the cerebral ideas in it, but sort of watching Eddie, who's a kid from the hood, who didn't have any economic opportunity, and seeing sort of the light in his eyes when he learns to make a radio play off solar energy for the first time, or seeing him beam with pride when he tells his neighbor how much money she's going to save as a result of the work that he's doing. And so for him, it wasn't just about finding work, but it was about work that actually has meaning for the world. And so that was sort of what moved me about this, in the making of this film, is that there's a story about solar energy that I think is more about the human interest and about human uplift that the media has been missing.
Okay, now you do make fleeting mention of nuclear power in this film in regards to Germany getting to the point within the next decade where its sustainable green energy generating technology might likely take over its reliance on nuclear energy. That said, and as uncomfortable as it is for many people to acknowledge, nuclear power has emerged as a very efficient, very clean source of power over traditional dirty technologies. Does your film give nuclear power enough credit?
Well, my film really isn't about nuclear power, so
Yeah.
I don't spend very much time speaking about nuclear power in the film.
Yeah, but I guess to put it to you as a filmmaker, Shalini, didn't it deserve a little bit more attention just in terms of the fact of how many countries, such as France, is about 75% nuclear accident-free? So, did it deserve a bit more attention?
My film really focuses on renewable energy. That is energy that is from sources that cannot be exhausted. And for me, while, I feel like environmentalists are often split because any energy source that weans us from carbon-intensive sources like coal is often welcomed, I still feel that there is not really an economic model that supports nuclear energy. It's hard to ensure, and the waste is really hard to dispose of. And so it really wasn't the focus of my film. There's a whole separate film that could be done on nuclear energy. My focus is really about energy that focuses on renewable sources. And I think there's quite a bit of exciting things happening purely in that space that can sustain us in the 21st century.
Okay, that's a clear enough statement on what you think of nuclear energy. But again, just for the record, and to make sure we're absolutely clear, are you anti-nuclear, or did you just feel that, as you said, it didn't quite fit into the agenda or to the brief of your film?
It did not fit into the story of my film, no.
Now, you quite rightly focus on China as being, I guess, the great industrial propellant for solar power. I'm very keen to know from you, when you went to China, what was the major difference in mindset that you found from the Chinese? Because they seem to be able to make things happen at the drop of a hat. Once they decide something's worthwhile, they don't appear to get caught up in all the red tape and bureaucracy that we Westerners seem to specialize in.
Well, look, it's not possible to see what China has done in the solar space and not be awed. They went from producing less than 1% of the world's global solar to producing upwards of 80% of the world's global solar in less than 10 years. So it's hard not to be awed by that. That being said, they have a different set of they have a different government system than our social democracies. But one thing that I feel that they do well is setting clear long-term targets. That seems to be key in any kind of long-term energy policy, and seeing new sort of technologies and energy innovation grow, we need long-term policy that sort of supports those industries. And that's what China and Germany, for that matter, have done well in different ways.
They certainly do seem to be like the Leviathan leading the way in this regard. Did you sense that there was any embarrassment, say, on America's part, that they were sort of seeing how great the Chinese were doing and in some regards taking their lead from the Chinese? It's a bit embarrassing because, let's face it, they're still commies.
Well, absolutely. I think that, the film really looks at the idea of this era of American exceptionalism, and that America used to be the kind of place that could do big things like going to the moon. And now sort of our political partisanship is preventing real visionary leadership in the space of energy innovation and technologies of the future. And I think we have to tip our hat to China in saying they really made a clear decision from the top down that they are going to be a leader in these technologies of the future, be it solar and wind. They are lining up the manufacturing chains and the resources to do that effectively and efficiently. And also, they're help bringing the cost down for the rest of us who are benefiting from cheap solar goods and products. So the good news is that now we live in a global system, and it takes all of us to sort of create a new global transition.
Now, you do follow the arc of Van Jones. Can you just briefly describe to us who Van Jones is and what happened to him during the course of filming this?
Absolutely. So Van Jones begins as sort of a local Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area based activist who sort of has this vision of green jobs being the thing that lifts people out of poverty. And, sort of writes a book, gets it on the bestseller list, and becomes the person who brings it from this local city, Richmond, where my film takes place, to the national level when President Obama sort of invites him to be his sort of right-hand green jobs czar. And the film sort of follows him as sort of a young activist and visionary who goes to the White House and is then attacked by sort of the forces that be in the media in sort of a smear campaign. And so the film is about what happens to him individually, but also what happens to the movement as a result of his individual story.
You mentioned the smear campaign in the film. You don't go into too much detail, though, about what that constituted. Was there any reason for that you didn't want to repeat the smears, or were there legal reasons?
The smears did not actually have to do with clean energy, nor were they relevant particularly to the story. And some of the smears are indeed included in the film. But again, there could be a separate film just on that smear campaign.
I imagine as a filmmaker, you must have been very upset when that happened, because you had going there a great character arc, and it must have upset your vision of what the film could have been had his trajectory continued unblemished and uninterrupted.
Well, as a documentary filmmaker, you are prepared and you anticipate, but I think part of the process of being a documentary filmmaker is that you're constantly surprised. And so that's part of the process.
Yep, your job is there to capture what happens, and you certainly captured that. Now, Shalini, just for the record, I need to ask you, you describe yourself as an independent filmmaker and as an activist. Aren't those terms mutually exclusive?
No, I think they both have to do strongly with having a voice in the world and thinking creatively about storytelling. And I think they both involve storytelling and being an engaged citizen of the world.
Again, I'm playing devil's advocate here, because people are always cynical, suspicious of films from people who describe themselves as activists having an agenda going in. And I just want you...
I think what separates Catching the Sun from sort of other climate change films is that it really is about people. I spent years of my life sort of following characters and waiting for things to happen. And I think that is what makes this story so different than other climate change films, is that it really is about the human stories of people on the ground who are making this global transition possible. And it's less about experts and more about just ordinary people like you and me who are leading the future.
Right. And again, just for the sake of clarity and to speak to the issue of it being an independent film, what would you say were the film's main credentials as an independent film? I guess what people want to hear is that you don't have money from interest groups backing this movie.
No, the film was supported all by charitable foundations like Sundance, MacArthur, and Ford. We received no money from the solar industry for the film, and it's all been independently funded by charitable donations from foundations. Pretty solid.